the 50th district, which includes parts of Cayuga and Onondaga counties. Angie, thanks so much for doing this here in the last full week of the campaign.
Always a pleasure to be here, Robert. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's start. What's the latest? What's the latest from the trail? In terms of obviously we're in early voting and election day is less than a week away.
Yeah, so this is the last week and the last leg of what was a very exciting campaign. As you remember, we started out prior to the pandemic thinking we were going to be in a special election, which got postponed and then canceled, and then just the race to the finish for the general election. So and then the pandemic in the midst of it. So not being a politician, not ever campaigning before, I think it was probably easier for me to transition the campaign efforts more than most candidates who do this regularly and have been on the campaign trail before. So we've been, as you know, doing a lot of social media and as primary way, at least, to get the message out. And now we're at the finish line, and we're just looking forward to this last week. We've got a few events or interviews or different things happening this week, and then our focus is reaching out to the voters in that last leg of it.
I did want to ask you, because there's been some news involving your campaign in the last week, a couple of, I think, significant endorsements. One from former Senator John DeFrancisco, who, of course, held this seat for 25 years. And then just this week, Onondaga County Executive Ryan McMahon. I guess, what do you think that says about your campaign, that you have the support of those two individuals? Because certainly McMahon is the county executive now, and then just given DeFrancisco's history with this district.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you how pleased I am. First, to have the endorsement by Senator DeFrancisco, someone, as you say, was in this position, and he'll correct you and say 26 years that he was in the seat. And he did such a great job for the 50th district. We talk all the time about term limits and people getting complacent, but if you had to choose one person that really worked hard right up until the end, it was Senator DeFrancisco. He did so much for our area, and I hope to fill his shoes. They're big shoes to fill, but I'm going to work really hard to make sure that I make him proud, as well as every single Central New York voter. So I'm pleased to have that endorsement. And then the endorsement of County Executive Ryan McMahon, someone who I've worked with, I've spoken to time and time again. I think he's doing a phenomenal job in Onondaga County with the management of this pandemic, and I've learned a lot from him with regard to that. And it's really just an honor to have those two endorsements. And I think if I had to pinpoint anything in particular, both of those individuals realize really how hard hit from an economic standpoint the 50th district has been, and really the state as a whole, but certainly in Central New York because of the pandemic. And so really, we've got a lot of work to do to help our small businesses climb out of this hole that the pandemic caused and the shutdowns caused. And given my background as a small business owner, someone who's been in business for a very long time, and I work with a lot of small businesses, and I work with a lot of individuals like you and I work with nurses and teachers and manufacturer plant workers and police officers. So I really understand what the challenges are of the voter within Central New York. And I think that they recognize that as well. And so that's why they can come out and endorse me and know that I'm going to work really hard for our district. And then if I can just piggyback on those endorsements and just say I'm very proud. I received the MACNY endorsement this week. I've received other endorsements from NFIB to the Business Council. And then another endorsement that I'm really proud of is the Auburn PBA endorsement. And specifically because we're working really hard with our law enforcement agencies to figure out how we build these relationships, build these bridges within the communities, and also support our law enforcement for all of the good work that they do. And I was very proud to receive that endorsement from Auburn as well.
Uh, to piggyback on something you were talking about regarding the endorsement from Ryan McMahon, the Onondaga County executive, and then his response to the pandemic. Uh, Wanted to get your thoughts on what you think the state can do, in terms, or what the state needs to do additionally in terms of the COVID-19 response, but especially to complement obviously what's being done at the local level, because as we've seen certainly in Onondaga County and Cayuga counties that I know of, the local officials and regionally speaking, they're really driving the process. You don't have, the state, heavily involved, so it's the locals that are tasked with it. So how do you complement that work that they're doing with state support?
Well, and you bring up an interesting point. You're really hitting the nail on the head. Some of these things, whether it's dealing with the pandemic, whether it's dealing with economic development, or any of the other community issues that we have, the best way to tackle anything is with local approach, right? Because Albany is so out of touch. They have no idea what the issues are in Cayuga County. They don't know what the issues are in Onondaga County. They barely know what the issues are in Albany. So for them to, pass down legislation or to tell us how to run the show here, it just doesn't always work. That one size does not fit all. I have to commend our local electeds in terms of what they've been able to do with regard to the pandemic, how they've been able to manage the cases. We have built a great infrastructure with testing and tracing, and we can identify where the problems are going to be before the problems even occur, and get ahead of it. And that's why even on today on a 7-day rolling average, we're at 1.1, 1.2% somewhere in that ballpark. It's because we have great testing efforts and great tracing efforts, and that is to be applauded by both your county ledge as well as Onondaga County, and all of the good work that people are doing there. From a grander approach, what we need to do is make sure that we have at the local level the resources to continue that good work, because I think the pandemic is, the virus is going to be with us probably until the end of time at this point, just like the flu is with us. We're never going to get to zero, and now we need to learn how to manage the virus and keep everybody as safe as possible, especially while we wait for a vaccine to become available, so that those who wish to receive it can get it. And so the next leg of this management, this health crisis management, is going to be the distribution of that vaccination. But from a state level, what we need to do is make sure that that we provide the resources to our local areas so that they can continue the management of the virus and get people back to work. I mean, at the end of the day, all of this really drives to one focus and one thing alone, and that is to get people back to as normal as possible and as safely as possible. And that means going back to work, that means going back to school, and just going about life as best as we can. We'll be able to do that as long as we can keep things under control like we have been.
So to look on the private side of that, what do employers need from the state, you think, to make that happen, to not only bring their workers back, but to do businesses safely in this pandemic?
Well, employers are doing really a great job. If you look at small businesses across the board, a lot of them had a huge struggle. They applied for their PPP. They had to put out money for the PPE that they needed to open up. Gyms and restaurants and other places were upgrading their ventilation systems in order to be able to welcome their guests back into their businesses. And so there's a lot of support that they still need, but at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing that we can do for them is be leaders in this. And what I mean by that is we need to give them proper guidance. And if we were to maintain whatever the benchmark is, and I'll just say 1% as an arbitrary number, But let's say a 1% infection rate is a benchmark that we want to use to help us determine when we can move forward. We need to set guidance so that all these small businesses, our schools, our hospitals, everybody is on board and knows that we're going to be able to increase the capacity for restaurants because we've maintained this benchmark. And we've maintained this benchmark for whatever the period of time is that's set forth. But we've got to figure out what that number is, and then create the guidance so people know where to go from here. And that's the thing that I think in New York State, up until this point, we've been lacking. So, we don't know what phase we're in anymore. The regional approach just about got abandoned, and people are still looking for information as to when, especially with the winter coming. Restaurants are asking, when are we going back to a 75 or 100% capacity? I've got to move everybody indoors now. When are we going to be able to increase this? And what is the metric that we need to meet in order to do that? If we can do anything for our community, it's identifying what that is and giving proper guidance at this point.
Let's shift to the budget deficit because at last check it was 14.5 billion and will likely increase by the time the budget process rolls around next year. But uh, what needs to be done in your view to rein that in? What are your priorities in terms of the budgetary process?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a difficult answer, and it doesn't matter who you ask. It's pretty much going to be the same answer, which is we are in dire need of federal funds at this point. New York State did a terrible job managing the budget prior to this pandemic. We were at a $6.2 billion budget deficit. And at that time, we needed to really make some grown up decisions and tighten the belt and look long and hard at where we were spending money and if we were spending money in the proper places to benefit the taxpayers. I identified a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse among the Medicaid program, improper payments that went out that should not have gone out. That was thanks to the good work of the comptroller and his audits that he's been doing. So prior to the pandemic, there were certainly ways that we could get back on track with the budget. And I think economic development and creating a better business climate, a better tax climate, so that we can attract businesses into the state and attract more jobs here and generate other types of revenue other than just increasing people's income tax rates across the board. That's a better approach. Now that we've got this hole of a $14.5 billion budget deficit, we really do need that federal fund money to come in. I believe that it will. I know that our congressional delegates have been working really hard to make that happen. It just may not happen until after the first of the year. So we're fortunate here in Onondaga County that our sales tax receipts were much better than expected, and now we don't have to lay off or furlough anybody that was next to do so. And that tells you one thing, that sales tax revenue is really important and can be the saving grace for our local economy and for our local municipalities. And how do you generate more sales tax? You provide better economic opportunities for people. And it's really that simple.
Let's talk economic development because I know that there's been just covering this. Certainly, there have been some success stories we see right here in Central New York, plenty of examples, but there's also examples of some of these programs not living up to their promise, whether that's on the business end of it or the state's end of it. So, what in your mind needs to change with the state's economic development approach?
And if you're specifically talking about the regional economic development, Red Sea, then I would say that we certainly could do a better job of managing that and getting into partnership with businesses that are going to fulfill their end as well as us fulfilling our end here. And I think that it works best when the region has the decision-making power, as opposed to Albany or the governor deciding what he thinks the best economic opportunity is going to be for Central New York. Let Central New York decide what we need and how we're going to partner up with businesses to have a great economic impact to our area. So we certainly can change up how we do that, and I'm looking forward to being on the front line of that and helping that process fetter out. But I think that, at the end of the day, if we can just get to a place where the business climate here and the tax climate here is more attractive, we're going to do the good work of attracting businesses here, like we were able to do with some other businesses. And I'll use Amazon here as an example. We were able to attract Amazon to the area, and I believe that the governor was really looking forward to them being downstate, and that deal fell through, and we could have a long conversation as to why that happened, but we're benefiting from their poor decision making now, and I think that's going to be a great opportunity for some great jobs here, and it's going to be uh, probably a catalyst for us to attract other businesses and provide economic benefit to our smaller businesses because Amazon is here. So these are the things that we need to be looking at and figuring out how we encourage that those businesses to come here.
Something that's come up a lot in most of the state legislative races I've covered is Democratic candidates saying that by being in the majority, they would have the benefit of bringing more funding home and more say in the process, so to speak. So I'm curious to get your perspective on the other side of it. Why do you think it's important to have not someone in the minority specifically, but that check, so to speak, that you would have if you're elected, that you would be representing the district, of course, but also a different voice than the Democratic majority would offer.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Everybody knows we do better when there's balance, when everyone has a seat at the table. And right now we've got a very out of balance Albany. So it doesn't matter majority, minority, you're only really hearing one voice. And so that's not doing anyone any good. And so I believe that we're going to benefit greatly by having me in that Senate seat and just voicing the concerns of Central New York as vigorously as I can. And I believe we're going to do a lot of good work in Albany to bring that voice to the table and get things done that we need to get done. I don't think that being in a minority position puts me in a weakened position at all. I think that if we bring good ideas to the table, that we can have good conversations about what needs to get done, that people will listen, that we can encourage bipartisan agreement and pass some really good legislation that's going to be beneficial to everybody. And that's what I'm going to be working really hard to do. This one party rule that's happening right now out of Albany is not really benefiting Central New York whatsoever. And I'll give you just, one example. We talk about education funding quite a bit. And I had made a comment in the debate, and it is actually true. You can, they can fact check me if they want. But the Republicans have brought more education funding to the table than the Democrat majority has. And what we saw in last year's budget and this year's budget was $12 million per year going to downstate schools for education while everybody else got cut. That school was Yonkers. The Senate Majority Leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, is from Yonkers. So don't tell me that being in the majority is going to benefit Central New York. It's not.
In terms of education funding, I know we've talked about this before, the problems facing Auburn among other districts that think that believe that they're considered high need districts and should be getting more aid, but the formula and the outdated data prevents that from happening. So, what will you do on that front to really work to ensure that schools like Auburn get equitable aid from the state?
Yeah, and I know the Republican Party had to advocate really hard for Auburn about 5 or 6 years ago to get them some additional funding and was able to, and that's going to have to continue until we have real conversations around the table as to why the foundation aid doesn't work and why the current funding mechanism for education is broken and needs to be repaired somehow. And we have to figure out how best to do that. Nobody wants to address it because first, it's using really outdated information. So we're using information from 2000 in terms of enrollment and things like that. So we need to start using current information. But nobody wants to be the bad guy when we start using current information. That may mean that some schools were getting more funding than they should have, and other schools were getting less funding than they should have. And so we need to swap it. And nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news and say, you've been getting paid more funding than you should have. We've got to pull it back. Nobody wants to do that. So we've got to figure out a very fair and equitable way that we get everybody back on board and get the funding necessary for these schools. But in my education plan, one of the things that I want to focus on is making sure that additional education funding that we put forth goes to PPE for the teachers, staff, and kids, for upgrading old buildings that need proper ventilation, for providing tech packs and Chromebooks to schools, that every student has a Chromebook at their hands, and then I want to focus on providing a core program for students that they have to take that's going to teach them a job ready skill. So we'll provide a core program. They can choose what program they want to take, but they have to take something that's going to get them job ready. And so that would be my education focus moving forward. And I think we need it really bad at this point.
You mentioned technology, and one issue that I'm not surprised that it has bipartisan agreement, but it's getting, I think, more attention this year just because of the situation that we've found ourselves in, is broadband, the need for additional broadband access, in various communities, whether it's urban, rural, suburban. There's definitely gaps. So how would you approach that issue at the state level? I know that the state had an initiative some years ago that seems to have fallen short. They blame different parties for that, but what more needs to be done to provide broadband access?
Yeah, I mean, the state needs to pull back the fees that they're charging the carriers. The carriers don't want to come in and lay the fiber down because it costs them a tremendous amount of money because the state assesses a fee. And they won't allow, and of course, and that's good that they don't allow the carrier to pass that fee on to the consumer. But who can build the infrastructure if you make it so darn impossible and costly in New York State to do it? We're seeing it with broadband. We've been seeing it with construction for years. New York State causes these problems. They pass legislation and they tax and fee people to death, and then it becomes so expensive for the state that we as the taxpayers aren't getting what we should be getting for services, and that's really the problem. So if we can pull back the fees and let these carriers lay the fiber, then we can increase the broadband access, and we need to be able to do that.
Just a couple questions to close out here. One is, what's the biggest difference between you and your opponent, John Mannion, in this race? If you had, I'm sure that there's a number of them that you could list, as any candidate in a campaign could, but if you had to narrow it to one, what would you say that difference is?
Well, listen, it's easy. With my small business background, and all that I've done in terms of helping others is really going to be the glaring difference between myself and my opponent. In the midst of a pandemic, when families are struggling, when businesses are struggling, we need someone with my skill set that's going to help. Um, Really carry people out of the hole and get them not just to survive but to thrive. I say that all the time. This is not a survival thing. We've got to thrive here as a community. And again, as I say, my clients are small business owners, they're mom and pop shops, they're blue collar workers, they're retirees, they're seniors. And I hear day and day what their struggles are. I help them solve those problems. I do planning for them. That's worst case scenario planning. So we would have been prepared for a pandemic had I been in that seat helping the state along, saying we need these things in case this happens. And so that is really going to be the glaring difference, is that I know what we need because I talk to people and have talked to people for many, many years on what the issues are. And I've already created the plans to help us start the process. So we're ready right out of the gate to make things happen. And I'm looking forward to being able to do that.
Mhm. And then lastly, this is more of kind of an election question. How do you see, the Republican ticket? Obviously, you're one of those down ballot races, I guess further across the ballot, the way that they're laid out now. But obviously, there's a big congressional race here that your district is entirely within New York 24, and then obviously the presidential race. So how do you see that? Those two races helping your campaign for state senate?
I don't know if they're going to help or hurt or what. It's interesting because I think that what we're going to see this year is just a complete turnout. People are very engaged one way or another, and so we're going to get a tremendous amount of turnout, I think, and we're seeing that as early voting polls have opened and there's lines out the door and people are getting out there to vote. And I think that's great that everybody's really engaged and exercising their right to vote. Um, I just think that with my race, people really need to get tuned in to what this race for the Senate district is about, what the plans are on the table. I know I've put plans forth. Not only have I said what the problems are, but I've also preached what I believe we can do and what I propose to do to solve those problems. I haven't heard that from my opponent. He's just said what the problems are, but I've never heard of any plans on his part as to what he's going to do to solve them. So I hope that people educate themselves on that. And Robert, since we're at the 1 week mark, I just have to say I'm very, very proud of the campaign that I've run. We run a nice, clean campaign. We brought ideas to the table, and we've worked very, very hard throughout the process. And so I really have no regrets. I think we're going to do fantastically well by election day, and people are going to make good, solid choices. And I'm looking forward to that.
Great. Yeah, so uh, obviously early voting is happening now. We're in day 5, I think, as we speak here, and it wraps up on Sunday, November 1st. Absentee ballot applications were due yesterday, so those have I know thousands of people in the district or in central New York, I should say, have already voted by absentee and have voted early voting. And then, of course, election day is November 3rd. So get out there and vote. Angi Renna, Republican candidate for state senate in the 50th district. Thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you, Robert. Always a pleasure. Have a good one.